This video is about Solie's poem, Other People's Houses. And this is a poem that deals with the question of the identity of the speaker in the poem. That is, who is speaking to us. And if you've read the poem all the way through, you'll know that this poem is kind of like a joke or a mystery. That is, it has a punchline or a whodunit at the end. But perhaps the most striking thing about it is that at the end she says, "It's much simpler when all you know about me is that I lie." And what that phrase does is it casts the entire poem into question. And we don't get that until the end. And so it forces us really to go back and reread the poem and say, look, we've been lied to all the way along. And so what is real about this poem? And so one of the tropes that poetry sometimes plays with, and I hear this a lot, is that poems are supposed to be about expressing yourself, or supposed to be about your feelings and, all this intimate stuff. And that's one kind of poetry, but it's certainly not the only kind of poetry. Poems do anything they want. And so this idea of, hallmark, romantic, gushy love poetry is something I just tend to, bracket off and say, yeah, that's just, things that you pay bad money for on Valentine's Day. Sure, love poems have their place, but not every poem is a love poem. And this one clearly is not doing that. It's a poem about deception. Now, there might be deception in love, but this really isn't a love poem necessarily. So we have to go back and reread this poem and think about it. And so one of the things I want to draw your attention to, and it's part of the poem, and I'm going to focus on this. It's not the only part, but it's certainly an important part. I want you to think about the relationship between language, the material stuff of language, words on the page, and the body. Okay. If we take the body both in its material sense of, a physical entity, but also the body as a conduit or a repository for the person, the soul, the personality of the individual. And so how does language contribute to the construction of identity? Because arguably, if this poem is about identity and the identity of the speaker, how do we do that? How do we construct that through the poem? So we get it in the second line of the poem. It says, "Other people's houses are bordered with geraniums. Inside, bodies curve parenthetically around all they own." So notice how she's using the language of language as metaphor here. Okay? So parentheses, brackets, bodies curve parenthetically around all they own. A chair purchased at the baby's birth. So the body is curved into the chair like a parenthesis. So notice that language and the body are linked. Okay. The third stanza, she says, "To move into such intimacy, to grow accustomed to the rhythmic mechanics of dwelling, as children who sleep in basement rooms might teach what it means to remember a body with something other than language." So notice that body and language are linked there. That near miss trying always to cast bones out of words. So she's saying children can teach us, readers, adults, what it means to remember a body with something other than language. That how do we get away from thinking of our body as strictly constructed by language and linguistic things, trying always to cast bones out of words? What does it mean to really feel something, to experience something without the mediating substance of language? Can we experience things non-linguistically? Now, of course, the obvious answer is yes, we do. But there's lots of people out there who talk a lot about how language constructs our reality. The way we name things and use language in the world affects how we think about things. So if you know another language, for example, people talk about this all the time, that there's ways to say things in other languages that don't translate into the other language, so English to French or whatever. This is what we call lost in translation. So what is lost in the translation of the body into language, or vice versa? Okay, so is it possible to remember a body with something other than language? And children, the speaker in this poem, suggests that there is a way to do that. And she says, "I'm not up to it, merely a woman of questionable substance, say, of low resolution, low resolve. On the streets, in the cafes, I look just like a pile of clothes. And notice how the clothes here become a stand-in for the body. There is no body there but the pile of clothes. And so clothes, like language, are a representation. They're a statement of fashion. They're an outward appearance. They cover the body. It's not the body itself. It's the shape of the body. And she's saying, I'm not of any substance. I don't have any substance. I'm merely a woman. And there's a whole gendered reading of this poem that we could do. I'm just a bunch of clothes. That's all people see of me. How simple this slide into the indefinite. How artless. Okay? And then we get a shift. It says, I could tell of one spring in Saskatchewan. Now notice, if you're attentive to language here, this is what we call the subjunctive. It's a conditional tense of language. I could tell. I could tell of one spring. And she's making it up. She's lying. And this, as we reread the poem, we see, oh, wait a minute. Did this really happen? Because at the end she says, no, I don't like birds, right? And I'm lying to you. And so she says, I could tell of one spring in Saskatchewan when sudden orioles bathed our grain-doped eyes in orange, made nests of strange new song in our ears. And so one of the things that people often talk about with poetry and stuff is its imagery and its language and its artfulness and stuff. And here she's saying, I can do that. I could do that about Saskatchewan. We could talk about the birds. We could, very imagistic stuff, right? Our grain-doped eyes in orange made nests of strange new song in our ears. You can hear the birds. You can, think about the grain dust in your eyes. It's heavily evocative language. So she's playing the poet game, the game of poetry, as it were, only to a few lines later tell us, no, it's all BS, right? I'm just lying to you. And so what that does is it snaps us out of this lie of poetry that the world is simply a mirage. It's a representation. And we're faced with a problem, not just of the speaker and who the identity of the speaker is, but also the whole artifice of art. That what is the relationship of art, poetry, literature to the real stuff? Okay? And this debate has been going on forever. We're not going to answer it or solve the problem here, but it's a way to get us to think about, why do we read stories? Why do we read poetry? Why do we study literature? What do we get out of it? And this is where we should, think of poems like Al Purdy's At the Quinty Hotel. What is the value or the use of poetry when, as Solie says, the speaker in her poem, at the end, all I'm doing is lying to you.